It starts quietly. No explosions, no sirens, just a policy memo, a press release, a tariff adjustment buried on page 12. And yet, this is how global crises begin now. Not with tanks rolling across borders, but with spreadsheets, sanctions, and shipping lanes that suddenly stop making sense. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people haven't fully absorbed yet. The biggest global risk today isn't war the way we picture it. It's economic confrontation between major powers. And unlike traditional wars, this one doesn't stay over there. It reaches into your savings account, your job, your grocery bill, your pension, even if you never follow geopolitics, especially if you don't. Right now, the world's largest economies are no longer trying to win together. They're trying to make the other side weaker. And the system we all rely on was never designed for that. To understand why this matters now, we need to rewind just a little. For most of the last 30 years, the global economic story was cooperation dressed up as competition. Countries specialized. Supply chains stretched across oceans. Capital flowed freely. Efficiency was king. If it was cheaper to make a chip in Taiwan, assemble it in China, design it in California, and ship it everywhere else, then that's what happened. It wasn't patriotic. It wasn't moral. It was just math. And the math worked. Inflation stayed low. Profits stayed high. Consumers got used to abundance. We built a world where everything depended on everything else. And for a while, that fragility looked like strength. Then the cracks started showing. The financial crisis, trade wars, a pandemic, a shooting war in Europe. And now, something deeper, a shift in mindset. Major powers have stopped asking, is this efficient? They're asking, is this safe? That single change rewires the entire system. Because safety is expensive, redundancy costs money, and distrust destroys the logic of globalization. Here's the simple version of how economic confrontation works. Instead of firing missiles, countries restrict access to markets, access to technology, access to capital, access to energy. You don't bomb a factory. You cut it off from critical components. You don't invade a country. You freeze its foreign reserves. You don't blockade ports with ships. You do it with insurance rules and compliance laws. And on paper, it all looks very civilized. But the effects compound fast. Let's walk through one example. Modern economies run on a handful of choke points: semiconductors, energy, shipping. Currency systems? Take semiconductors. They're not just in phones and laptops. They're in cars, power grids, medical devices, weapons systems. No chips, no modern economy. Now here's the uncomfortable math. A tiny number of companies in a tiny number of places produce the most advanced chips on Earth. If access to those chips becomes a political weapon, entire industries freeze. Not slow down, freeze. And this isn't theoretical. We've already watched factories shut down because a $5 component didn't arrive. Now scale that up. Deliberately. Energy works the same way. For decades, energy trade was treated as mutually beneficial. You sell, I buy. Everyone wins. Until it isn't. Once energy becomes leverage, price stops being the main variable, control becomes the variable, and control creates volatility. Suddenly, energy prices aren't about supply and demand. They're about statements, retaliation, and signaling, which makes inflation unpredictable. And inflation is where this stops being abstract. Inflation is how economic confrontation shows up in real life. Higher food prices, higher rent, higher interest rates. Central banks respond by tightening. Borrowing gets more expensive. Investment slows. Growth weakens. But here's the twist. At the same time, governments are making economies less efficient on purpose. They subsidize domestic production. They duplicate supply chains. They stockpile. All rational from a security standpoint. all inflationary from an economic one. So policymakers end up fighting fires they started themselves. This is the hidden mechanism most headlines miss. Economic confrontation doesn't cause one shock, it causes overlapping ones. Trade restrictions raise costs, energy weaponization raises volatility, capital controls distort markets, sanctions break payment systems. Each one alone is manageable. Together, they create something more dangerous: uncertainty. Markets hate uncertainty more than bad news. Bad news can be priced in, uncertainty can't. And uncertainty freezes decision making. Companies delay investment. Consumers pull back. Governments overcorrect. That's how you get slowdowns that don't look dramatic at first until they suddenly are. There's an irony here. The same interconnected system that once reduced the risk of war is now amplifying economic conflict. Because when everything is connected, everything is leverage. A shipping lane isn't just a route, it's a pressure point. A currency isn't just money, it's infrastructure. And when infrastructure becomes a weapon, everyone starts building walls. The hype says this is about resilience, about independence, about taking back control. The reality is messier. True independence is rare and expensive. What we're really seeing is selective decoupling. Countries aren't leaving the global system. They're trying to rewire it around themselves. That creates blocks. Blocks trade more internally, trust outsiders less, duplicate everything, which sounds stable. Until you remember one thing: the global economy isn't modular. You can't neatly separate it without friction. And friction shows up as lower growth. Lower growth means more political pressure. More pressure means more confrontation. It feeds itself. Now zoom out. This isn't just about the US and China, or Russia and Europe, or any single rivalry. It's about a world where economic rules are no longer neutral, where every supply chain decision is also a political decision, where CEOs have to think like diplomats, and diplomats think like risk managers. The danger isn't collapse tomorrow. The danger is normalization. A slow acceptance that shortages are normal, that higher prices are permanent, that volatility is the cost of security. History shows that long periods of economic stress don't stay purely economic. They leak into politics. They harden positions. They reduce room for compromise. And economic confrontations don't have clear off-ramps. There's no surrender ceremony, no peace treaty, just a gradual realization that everyone is poorer and nobody feels safer. So here's the question worth sitting with. If the global economy was built on trust, efficiency, and interdependence, and we're now dismantling those pillars in the name of security, what exactly replaces them? And are we sure the cure isn't more destabilizing than the disease? Because once economic confrontation becomes the default language between major powers, it doesn't stay strategic for long. It becomes structural. And by the time everyone agrees it's a problem, the system has already adapted around the damage, quietly, irreversibly.